Zariq had always found silence unsettling. Not the kind of silence born from calm, but the silence that hums with something unspoken. The kind that pervades every corner of the Galactic Council's records on Earth. An omission so deliberate it felt like a challenge. Earth, an isolated planet, kept distant not just physically but in thought. For all the galaxy's wealth of knowledge and understanding, Earth stood as an anomaly, a world apart, classified with a single label, Deathworld. He was not the only one to be drawn to it, but he seemed to be the only one unwilling to let the question rest. To the other students at the Academy, Earth was little more than an academic curiosity, a blip in the grand narrative of peaceful galactic societies that had long outgrown the need for violence, competition, or survival against nature's cruelty. There were stories about how life on Earth had evolved, shaped by endless cycles of catastrophe. Earth was a place of storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, a planet whose very foundation was unstable, whose nature seemed opposed to life itself. It defied the norms the Council had set. Planets like this were to be avoided, studied from afar, left alone. But something didn't sit right with Zariq. The Galactic Council had carefully cultivated peace, a unity forged through centuries of cooperation. The very idea of conflict or violence was alien to them. They lived in harmony with their worlds, with themselves, with each other. The universe, as they understood it, was orderly, predictable, a well-kept balance. Yet, here was Earth, an outlier, a reminder that the universe could still breed chaos, that it could still spawn worlds so hostile they seemed almost sentient in their malevolence. A death world, as they called it. But it wasn't the label that bothered Zariq. It was the question no one seemed willing to ask: why? Seated in the data hall, Zariq studied the holographic display of Earth. The spinning blue and green globe looked innocuous from afar, almost serene. Even, his eyes traced the curve of the oceans, the vast stretches of land, and he wondered how something so small, so distant, had come to be feared. His instructor, a soft-spoken elder with an air of finality about him, had described Earth's classification as a simple matter of fact. "We do not go to death worlds," he had said during their briefing. "They are unstable, unpredictable. Life there is not conducive to galactic norms. Earth, in particular, is dangerous. That is all you need to know." But that wasn't enough. Not for Zariq. The initial data was unsettling. Earth's environment, even by the Council's standards, was extreme. Zariq watched, almost numb, as the records played out before him. Seismic activity tore the planet's surface with violent tremors. Gigantic fissures swallowed entire regions. Fires raged uncontrollably, fed by oxygen-rich atmospheres that made combustion a constant threat. Oceans swallowed coastlines with devastating tsunamis, wiping out entire ecosystems in a matter of hours. Hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, these forces of nature were not rare occurrences, but regular patterns. The planet was in constant upheaval. And yet, life had endured. The simulations showed how species had adapted over millennia, how they had evolved to survive in environments that should have annihilated them. Species that were fast, resilient, and, above all, relentless. Predators at the top of their food chains, capable of withstanding conditions that would have destroyed life on most other worlds. It was as though Earth itself had tested them, pushed them to their absolute limits. Survival here wasn't just a struggle, it was an expectation, a demand. And then, humans emerged. Zariq leaned in as the projection shifted to focus on this species, the most perplexing part of the entire puzzle: humanity. It wasn't their physicality that stood out. There were species stronger, faster, more durable across the galaxy. No, it was their sheer audacity, their willingness to not just survive, but to conquer their environment. They didn't adapt to the world around them, they reshaped it. The records showed how humans, frail by comparison to other species, had risen to dominate their planet. How they tamed the wild, built cities in places where no life should have thrived, harnessed the power of the very forces that threatened to destroy them. They bent nature to their will, something no other species in the galaxy had done. Where others sought harmony, humans imposed control. Zariq's thoughts churned. What kind of existence was this? He tried to imagine living on a planet where disaster was a constant, where survival wasn't a given, but something you fought for every day. He couldn't grasp it. His fellow students had long moved on from the Earth study. For them, it was just another anomaly, a curiosity in the grand scheme of galactic knowledge. Earth had its place in the archives, and that was enough. But Zariq couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. Something that had been hidden, or perhaps ignored. He remembered how casually the Council had dismissed it. The secrecy around Earth's classification. The way questions about it were deflected. No one had an answer that went beyond the obvious. Earth is dangerous. But danger alone wasn't reason enough for isolation. Zariq turned to the instructor, whose gaze remained fixed on the data before him, calm and detached. "Why was Earth really classified as a death world?" Zariq asked, keeping his voice neutral but pointed. The instructor glanced at him briefly, then returned his attention to the holographic display. "The reasons are clear. Its environment is inhospitable. Its species are unpredictable. The Council deemed it unsafe for contact." "That doesn't explain why it's isolated," Zariq pressed. "There are other dangerous worlds. Worlds with harsh environments, even predatory species. We study them. We visit them. Why is Earth different?" For a moment, the silence between them deepened. The instructor shifted, discomfort crossing his face for the first time. "Earth is unique," he finally said. "It's not just the environment, nor the species. There's something about humanity, the way they evolved, their relationship with their planet. The Council believes that interacting with them would be unwise." "Unwise?" Zariq repeated, his curiosity sharpening. "Why?" The instructor met his gaze, a coldness settling over his expression. "There are some truths better left unexplored, Zariq. Some worlds exist for a reason. Earth is one of them." Zariq felt a knot tighten in his chest. This was more than caution. It was fear. The Council, in all its wisdom, was afraid of Earth. "What is it about them?" he asked quietly. The instructor sighed, his gaze softening, almost pitying. "It's not the humans themselves, it's what they represent. Earth is not a death world because of its storms, or its predators, or its natural disasters. Earth is a death world because, despite all of it, life thrives there. Life adapts, it evolves. And in humanity, that will to survive, to dominate, became something far more dangerous than the planet itself." Zariq's mind raced, the implications settling over him like a weight. The Council wasn't just avoiding Earth because it was dangerous. They were avoiding it because humanity had turned that danger into something else, something that couldn't be controlled. He stared at the holographic display, at the swirling clouds and chaotic landscapes of Earth, and for the first time, he felt a sliver of understanding. The Council wasn't protecting the galaxy from Earth. They were protecting the galaxy from what Earth created. Zariq sat quietly at the back of the data hall, watching as the holographic display of Earth continued its slow, unrelenting rotation. The instructor's words from the previous session still weighed heavily on him. Earth is a death world because, despite all of it, life thrives there. It was more than just a dangerous planet. It was a testament to life's ability to endure against the most impossible odds. But what did that endurance mean? Was it something to be admired or feared? The quiet hum of the projection filled the room as other students filed in, many of them indifferent to the subject matter now that the initial intrigue had faded. For them, Earth was a mystery partially solved, enough to warrant moving on. But Zariq couldn't let it go. He knew, deep down, that the Council's decision to isolate the planet wasn't just about the environment. It was about something far more unsettling. Humanity's very existence challenged the fundamental understanding of life that the Galactic Council held dear. Today's session would delve deeper into Earth's violent history, its mass extinctions, its relentless cycles of destruction and rebirth, its evolution shaped by cataclysm after cataclysm. Zariq braced himself, knowing that what they were about to witness would only complicate his growing sense of unease. The lights dimmed, and the display shifted to Earth's ancient past. The planet was unrecognizable, a fiery, molten ball of chaos. The atmosphere was thick with toxic gases, the surface boiling with volcanic activity. Massive plumes of ash and gas filled the air, blocking out the sun for centuries at a time. Earth's first mass extinction, the instructor's voice intoned, calm and steady. A direct result of the Great Oxygenation Event, where the emergence of photosynthetic organisms caused a massive shift in the planet's atmosphere. The projection zoomed in on the oceans, revealing the single-celled organisms that had once dominated the planet. As oxygen levels rose, these early life forms began to die off en masse, unable to survive in the new environment they had unwittingly created. It was a cruel irony. Life, in its attempt to flourish, had brought about its own destruction. Zariq's gaze remained fixed on the display, but his thoughts drifted. The universe, he had always believed, was a place of balance. Life thrived where conditions were right, where harmony existed between nature and the species that lived within it. But here, on Earth, that harmony seemed to be an illusion. Life didn't thrive because of balance. It thrived in spite of constant upheaval. The projection shifted again, fast-forwarding through millions of years. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, ice ages, all of these events shaped the planet's surface, wiping out entire ecosystems in the blink of an eye. Yet, each time, life returned. Different, more complex, more resilient. As they watched, the holograph zoomed out to show Earth's entire history compressed into a few minutes. The rise and fall of species, the shifting of continents, the endless cycle of destruction and renewal. It was a planet in constant turmoil, yet it was this very turmoil that had allowed life to evolve into the complex forms they saw today. A soft murmur spread through the class as the students absorbed what they were seeing. Zariq glanced around, noting the mixture of awe and discomfort on their faces. Some seemed fascinated by Earth's resilience, while others looked unsettled by the sheer violence of its history. The instructor's voice cut through the murmurs. Many worlds experience cataclysms. Few recover as Earth has. What makes Earth unique is not just the severity of its disasters, but the persistence of life in the face of them. A student near the front raised a hand, her voice hesitant but firm. But what does that say about the life forms themselves? If Earth is constantly trying to destroy them, doesn't that mean that the planet itself is hostile to life? The instructor nodded. It's a valid question. Earth's environment is indeed hostile by most standards. But hostility and life are not mutually exclusive. In fact, one could argue that life on Earth thrives because of the challenges it faces. Zariq's mind latched onto the idea, spinning it over and over. Life thriving because of hostility. It was a concept that defied everything they had been taught about the natural order of the universe. Peace, balance, harmony. These were the ideals that guided life across the galaxy. But on Earth, survival was an ongoing battle, a constant push against forces that sought to erase it. Doesn't that make it cruel? Another student asked, his voice edged with discomfort. It's like the planet is punishing life for existing. The instructor paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. Cruelty is a matter of perspective. Life on Earth isn't punished by its environment, it's shaped by it. The species that have survived are not weaker for the challenges they've faced. If anything, they've become stronger. Zariq felt the tension in the room rise as the conversation grew more philosophical. He could see the divide forming among his peers. Some were beginning to admire Earth's tenacity, while others recoiled from the violence that had forged it. But Zariq found himself caught in the middle. Life is life, Zariq said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. No matter the environment, life will adapt. But just because it can adapt doesn't mean it should have to. His words hung in the air, and the room grew still as eyes turned toward him. He hadn't meant to speak, but now that he had, he couldn't stop. What I mean is, Zariq continued, there's a difference between surviving and living. On Earth, it seems like survival is the only option. Life there doesn't just thrive, it fights. Constantly. And that changes something. It changes the way species interact with each other, the way they view the world. The instructor tilted his head slightly, intrigued. Go on. Zariq hesitated, choosing his words carefully. On most worlds, life exists in balance. Species coexist because they've learned to live within their environment. But on Earth, that balance doesn't exist. Every species is in competition, not just with a planet, but with each other. Predators, prey, even the environment itself. Everything is in conflict. And that conflict has shaped humanity in ways we don't fully understand. Silence followed his words, but it wasn't the kind of silence that signaled dismissal. It was the kind that suggested the others were listening, thinking. For the first time, Zariq realized that his unease wasn't just about Earth's environment. It was about what that environment had created. Are you saying that humans are dangerous because of this? The student who had spoken earlier asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Zariq shook his head, uncertain. Not dangerous, necessarily, but different. They're a product of their environment in ways that we can't relate to. They've evolved in constant conflict, and that's bound to affect their worldview, their sense of self, their relationships with each other. The room remained quiet as the students processed his words. Zariq could see the gears turning in their minds, each one grappling with the implications of what he had said. The instructor stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. It's an interesting perspective, Zariq, and one that many scholars have debated. There are those who believe that Earth's history of violence has created a species uniquely suited for survival in extreme conditions. Others argue that this history has made humanity inherently volatile, prone to conflict in ways that we, as peaceful galactic citizens, find difficult to comprehend. Zariq nodded slowly. That's what I'm afraid of. The holographic display flickered, and the projection shifted again, this time focusing on humanity's more recent history. Wars, conquests, revolutions. Zariq watched as images of destruction filled the room, cities reduced to rubble, entire civilizations wiped out by human conflict. This is what we fear, the instructor said quietly. Not the planet, but the species it has produced. Humanity has evolved to see conflict not as something to avoid, but as something to embrace. They thrive in it, just as they thrive in Earth's hostile environment. But is that their fault? Zariq asked, his voice softer now. Can we really blame them for what they've become, given what they've had to endure? The instructor's eyes met his, a flicker of understanding passing between them. That is the question we must all consider, Zariq, and it's not an easy one to answer. The room was heavy with the weight of the discussion, and Zariq felt a growing sense of unease settling over him. He had come into this study of Earth with a simple curiosity, but now he was beginning to see that the implications went far deeper than he had imagined. Humanity wasn't just a dangerous species, they were a reflection of a truth that the Galactic Council had long tried to avoid. Life, in its purest form, was a struggle, a fight against the odds, and Earth was the ultimate expression of that struggle. As the session came to an end, the students filed out, their conversations hushed and thoughtful. Zariq lingered for a moment, staring at the holographic display of Earth still spinning slowly before him. He didn't know what the Council was so afraid of, but he was beginning to suspect that it wasn't just Earth's environment or its species that posed a threat. It was the idea that, in some ways, humanity's violent, chaotic existence might not be an exception to the universe's laws. It might be the rule. The hall felt colder today, as though the weight of the previous sessions had somehow seeped into the very walls. Zariq took his usual seat at the back, his gaze tracing the outlines of the holographic display that dominated the room. Today's session, they had been told, would focus on a specific species, humans, and their journey from mere survival to what they now called civilization. Zariq had been dreading this part, not because he lacked curiosity, but because he knew the implications of understanding these creatures would be far-reaching. The more they learned, the more it would unsettle the balance of the carefully maintained worldviews the Council had tried to enforce. The display flickered to life, showing Earth again, but this time it was different. Gone were the violent upheavals of the planet's early days. The molten chaos had subsided, leaving behind a world that was, while still dangerous, at least beginning to stabilize. The skies were no longer choked with ash and gas, The oceans had calmed, and on the land, something new was stirring. Humanity's rise, the instructor's voice echoed through the room. There was no need for dramatics. The statement carried enough weight on its own. Zariq leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as the display zoomed in on a small cluster of beings huddled around a fire. Their skin was weathered, their frames thin, and their movements slow and deliberate. Primitive tools lay scattered around them, nothing more than sharpened rocks and crude spears. The humans looked fragile, as though the planet could snuff them out at any moment. Yet there was something about the way they held themselves, the way their eyes flickered with a fire that was more than just the reflection of the flames before them. Zariq could feel the tension in the room rise as his peers watched the scene unfold. The humans moved together in a dance of necessity, gathering food, building shelter, fighting off predators that seemed infinitely stronger than they were. Every day was a struggle, but they didn't shy away from it. They moved through their world with a purpose, an intensity that Zariq found both unnerving and captivating. The display shifted, showing humans over time, millennia passing in mere moments. Their tools became more advanced, their shelters more complex. But even as they built civilizations, the struggle never ceased. Earth remained hostile, unforgiving. The humans were constantly at war with their environment, fending off disease, famine, and natural disasters that seemed designed to wipe them out. What's remarkable, the instructor said, is that despite these conditions, humanity didn't merely survive. They built, they learned, they adapted. Zariq's mind latched onto the word adapted. It was one thing to survive in a hostile environment, but to thrive in it, to take the very elements that sought to destroy you and turn them into tools for growth. That was something else entirely. As the display continued, he saw humans constructing vast cities, their architecture grand and imposing, as if daring the planet to test them again. They bent the land to their will, forging roads through mountains, irrigating deserts, and harnessing the energy of Earth's storms. Nature may have been their enemy, but they had found a way to coexist with it, on their terms. But it was more than just physical resilience that struck Zariq. There was a shift in the humans, a deepening of their understanding, not just of their world, but of themselves. The display showed them in moments of introspection, sitting alone by the fire, gazing at the stars, their minds reaching for something beyond mere survival. They began to question, to seek meaning in their existence. What had started as a struggle for life had transformed into something more profound, a search for purpose in the face of a universe that offered no guarantees. Zariq felt a growing unease as he watched. These were not creatures driven solely by instinct, by the need to feed and reproduce. There was something more to them, something that defied the simplicity with which the Council had categorized them. The humans were thinking, feeling beings, capable of great violence, yes, but also of incredible empathy, creativity, and love. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing one of Earth's countless wars. Armies clashed, swords against shields, guns against flesh. The humans were brutal in their combat, ruthless in their pursuit of victory. But as the scene played out, Zariq realized something. These wars weren't just about territory or resources. They were about ideals, beliefs, and philosophies. The humans fought not only for survival, but for what they believed to be right. And when the fighting was done, when the land was soaked in blood and the bodies of the fallen lay scattered, they grieved. They mourned their dead, even those they had called enemies. How can a species be so violent, and yet so compassionate? One of Zariq's peers whispered, echoing the question that had been circling in his own mind. Zariq didn't answer. He wasn't sure there was an answer. The room grew still as the display faded, leaving the students with nothing but their thoughts. Zariq's own thoughts were tangled, a web of conflicting emotions. The humans were dangerous, there was no doubt about that. But there was something else, something deeper that he couldn't quite grasp. It was as if their very existence challenged everything he had believed about life, about the universe itself. The instructor stepped forward, breaking the silence. You've now seen the full arc of humanity's rise. They began as fragile beings, at the mercy of their environment. But through sheer will and determination, they have not only survived, they've thrived. Earth's classification as a deathworld is not merely a reflection of its dangers, but of the strength it demands from those who live on it. Zariq shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the instructor's words. Strength. That was the word that kept coming back to him. The humans had been shaped by their environment, yes, but it wasn't just physical strength that had allowed them to rise. It was something deeper, something intrinsic to who they were as a species. They had been tested over and over again, and each time they had emerged stronger. But at what cost? As the students began to leave, Zariq remained seated, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Earth, something the Council had either missed or was deliberately hiding. The humans were a paradox, a species born of hardship, but capable of incredible beauty. They had faced extinction countless times and had always found a way to rise from the ashes. But what did that resilience mean? Was it something to be admired or something to be feared? He thought of the wars, the destruction, the senseless loss of life. But he also thought of the moments of quiet reflection, the times when the humans had looked beyond their own survival and sought something greater. He thought of the art they had created, the music, the literature. These were not the actions of a species driven solely by the need to dominate or destroy. There was something more, something that defied easy explanation. Zariq's mind drifted to a question that had been gnawing at him since the beginning of their studies. What defines life? Was it the ability to live in harmony with one's environment, as most species across the galaxy did? Or was it the ability to endure, to push back against a world that sought to destroy you and emerge stronger for it? The Council had classified Earth as a death world, but Zariq was beginning to wonder if that classification said more about the Council's own fears than it did about the planet itself. Perhaps Earth was dangerous, not because of its environment, but because of the species it had produced. A species that thrived on hardship, that found strength in struggle. As the last of his peers filed out, Zariq rose from his seat and approached the holographic display. The image of Earth flickered before him, its blue and green surface a stark contrast to the violence it had spawned. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the projection, and for a moment he felt a connection to the planet, as though its pulse matched his own. Zariq wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: his view of Earth and of humanity had shifted. He could no longer see them as mere survivors. They were something else, something more complex, more profound. And in that complexity, he sensed both a danger and a potential that the Council had yet to fully grasp. As he turned to leave the hall, Zariq's thoughts were filled with questions. What did it mean to thrive in a world that sought to destroy you? And more importantly, what would that kind of resilience mean if humanity ever set its sights beyond Earth? For the first time, Zariq found himself questioning whether the Council's isolation of Earth was truly about protecting the galaxy from the humans, or if it was about protecting the galaxy from the truth that humanity represented. A truth that Zariq was only beginning to understand. The atmosphere in the lecture hall was somber as the students filed in, their usual idle chatter absent. Even the walls seemed to press in, as though they anticipated the weight of the subject to come. Zariq's hands, normally steady, were restless today. He couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him after the last lesson. The deeper they delved into humanity's history, the more unsettling it became. Each new discovery felt like peeling back another layer of the human psyche, and today promised to cut deeper than ever before. The holographic display flickered to life, this time without preamble or ceremony. A battlefield stretched out before them, a vast expanse of bodies, fire, and destruction. The smell of ash and blood seemed to cling to the air, and though Zariq knew it wasn't real, his senses betrayed him, filling his mind with the phantom sensations of war. Humanity's relationship with violence is complicated, the instructor began, his tone devoid of the usual academic detachment. They have fought wars since their earliest days, not just against nature, but against each other. The image on the screen shifted, showing two opposing armies. The humans stood on either side, clad in primitive armor, their weapons crude but lethal. Zariq watched as they clashed, the sound of metal striking metal ringing through the hall. The humans fought with a fury that seemed disproportionate to the gains at stake. Land, resources, ideologies, these were reasons, yes, but Zariq sensed something deeper beneath it all. As the scene unfolded, Zariq felt his pulse quicken. The humans fought not just for survival, but for something intangible: pride, revenge, fear. He found himself drawn into their struggle, feeling the weight of each blow, the desperation in their eyes. These were not mere creatures fighting for dominance. There was something personal in every strike. Even in their destruction, they seemed to be searching for something, perhaps a sense of meaning, a way to define themselves through violence. Another scene played out, showing a more modern war, this time with machines, bombs, and weapons capable of annihilating entire cities. The destruction was on a scale Zariq had never imagined. The human capacity for violence had evolved, but the underlying emotions remained the same. The stakes had risen, but the battles were still fought with the same primal intensity. A murmur passed through the class, a mixture of horror and confusion. One student, sitting near the front, raised their hand. Why do they continue to fight? Even when they have so much to lose, they still push forward, destroying everything around them. Zariq felt the same question gnawing at him. It was as if humanity had a compulsion to destroy, to tear down what they had built, only to rebuild it again. The cycle seemed endless: war, destruction, peace, and then back to war. And yet, despite the brutality, there was a strange beauty in it, a kind of tragic nobility in the way they fought not just for survival, but for something greater, something deeply personal and utterly human. The instructor paused, allowing the question to hang in the air before responding. Humans are driven by many forces: fear, anger, love, power. But at the heart of it is a deep desire to define themselves, to carve out their place in a universe that offers no easy answers. War, for them, is not just a means of survival. It is a way of asserting their existence, of proving that they matter. Zariq's mind reeled at the implications. To fight not for territory or resources, but for meaning, was that what drove humanity's endless conflicts? He glanced around at his peers, their faces reflecting his own uncertainty. They were struggling to comprehend a species that seemed so contradictory, so self-destructive, and yet so deeply resilient. The display shifted again, this time showing the aftermath of a war. The cities lay in ruins, the skies dark with smoke. But amid the devastation, the humans emerged, wounded, yes, but alive. They began to rebuild, their hands bloody and their hearts heavy, but with a sense of purpose that defied the destruction they had wrought. There was no surrender in their eyes, only the quiet determination to rise once more. Zariq's chest tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He had expected to feel contempt for humanity's violence, to be repulsed by their capacity for destruction. But instead, he felt something more complex, a strange empathy that unsettled him. In their violence, he saw not just rage, but a profound struggle for identity. They fought not just to kill, but to be, to define themselves in a universe that cared nothing for them. He shifted in his seat, his mind racing. The wars, the conflicts, they weren't just about survival. They were about something deeper, something that had no simple answer. Humanity's violence was a mirror of their internal struggle, a reflection of their need to find meaning in a world that seemed indifferent to their existence. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, this drive to create and destroy, to build and tear down, all in the name of self-definition. The instructor's voice cut through Zariq's thoughts. Humanity's capacity for violence is matched only by their capacity for peace. They are a species of extremes, capable of great destruction and great compassion. It is this duality that makes them so dangerous and so fascinating. Zariq's brow furrowed. Duality. That word seemed to encapsulate everything he had felt since they began studying humanity. They were not just violent. They were also capable of incredible empathy, of love, of sacrifice. It was as if they contained within them the full spectrum of existence: life and death, creation and destruction, peace and war. They were a paradox, a species that defied easy categorization. As the lesson drew to a close, the students began to file out, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to quiet contemplation. But Zariq remained seated, his mind still grappling with the images he had seen. The wars, the violence, it was all too much, too complex to process in a single sitting, and yet he couldn't turn away from it. There was something about humanity that drew him in, something that felt both familiar and alien at the same time. The archives beckoned him again, their vast knowledge waiting to be explored. Zariq knew he couldn't leave yet. There was more to understand, more to uncover about this strange and contradictory species. As the last of his peers left the hall, Zariq rose from his seat and made his way toward the archives, his steps slow and deliberate. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of history. Zariq approached one of the terminals and activated it, the holographic display lighting up before him. He searched through the database, pulling up records of humanity's greatest wars, conflicts that had spanned centuries, involving millions of lives. The scale of it was staggering, and yet Zariq couldn't look away. Each war was different, yet the underlying themes were the same: power, fear, pride, and the need for meaning. As he scrolled through the records, Zariq felt a growing unease. Humanity's capacity for destruction was immense, but so too was their ability to endure. They had faced extinction countless times, and yet they had always found a way to survive, to rebuild, to rise from the ashes. It was as if their very nature was forged in conflict, their identity shaped by the violence they had both suffered and inflicted. Zariq's mind drifted to the philosophical implications of what he had seen. What did it mean to be a species defined by both creation and destruction? Could peace ever truly be achieved for a species that seemed to thrive on conflict? Or was war an intrinsic part of their existence, a necessary force that drove them to evolve, to grow, to become something greater? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more troubling than the last. But amid the confusion, one thought stood out, a thought that had been quietly growing since the beginning of their studies. Perhaps humanity's violence was not a sign of their weakness, but of their strength. Perhaps it was not the wars themselves that defined them, but their ability to endure them, to rise above the chaos and find meaning in the destruction. Zariq's heart raced as the thought took hold. What if the very thing that made humanity dangerous was also the thing that made them extraordinary? Their capacity for violence was undeniable, but so too was their capacity for growth, for change, for redemption. They were a species of contradictions, but perhaps it was these contradictions that gave them their power. As Zariq sat alone in the archives, the weight of his realization settled over him. Humanity's violence was not just a reflection of their brutality, but of their resilience. They fought not just to destroy, but to create, to forge a place for themselves in a universe that cared nothing for them. And in that struggle, Zariq saw a reflection of his own. Zariq sat at his desk, the dim glow of the archives terminal casting a soft, cold light on his face. His mind was still awash with the images of war and violence from the previous lesson. But today, he had returned to the archives for something different. There was more to humanity than destruction, there had to be. He scrolled through the endless catalog of human art and philosophy, searching for another side to the species, something that could reconcile the relentless violence with the flashes of empathy and compassion he had glimpsed. The archives hummed with the quiet energy of information waiting to be discovered. As the records of human art and culture began to unfold before him, Zariq found himself captivated by the depth and variety of expression. Unlike the cold logic of his own people, humanity's creations were imbued with raw emotion: hope, despair, love, anger. Each piece seemed to carry a part of its creator's soul, a window into the complex inner life that Zariq had only begun to understand. He pulled up a gallery of human art, the holograms floating in the air around him. Paintings of war and peace, sculptures of gods and mortals, poetry etched into digital canvases, each one a testament to the range of human experience. One painting, in particular, caught his attention. It was a chaotic swirl of color, a violent clash of reds and blacks that seemed to leap out of the frame. Yet amid the chaos, there were delicate strokes of white and gold, as though something fragile and beautiful was fighting to emerge from the violence. Zariq stared at it for a long time, feeling the tension between creation and destruction, between beauty and horror. Human, it seemed, were capable of both in equal measure. Beside the artwork, there was a poem, its verses short but potent. In the ashes of war, I find my love. In the shadow of death, I find my life. The simplicity of the words belied their depth. Zariq had studied countless civilizations, many of which valued precision and logic, but none that expressed their existence through such paradox. Humanity, it seemed, thrived not in spite of contradictions, but because of them. He found this both puzzling and oddly beautiful. As he scanned through more of their creations, it became clear that the same forces driving their violence were also the wellspring of their greatest achievements. A section on human music played next, filling the room with melodies that ranged from soft and melancholic to intense and chaotic. Zariq closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. Each note seemed to carry a story of love lost and found, of battles fought both on the battlefield and in the heart. The music swelled, and for a moment, Zariq could almost feel the emotions that had driven its creation, the longing, the pain, the joy. He opened his eyes slowly, the music still echoing in his mind. It was strange to him, the way humans seemed to embrace these conflicting emotions so fully. They weren't afraid of their contradictions. They wore them openly, letting them bleed into every aspect of their lives. It was in their art, their culture, their very being. And it was this, Zariq realized, that made them so different from his own people. For the first time, Zariq found himself questioning the way he had been taught to view his own culture. They had always valued order, reason, and control, qualities that had allowed them to build a stable, harmonious society. But as he delved deeper into humanity's history, he began to wonder if something was missing. Humans lived on the edge of chaos, constantly navigating the line between creation and destruction, and yet it was in this chaos that they found meaning. Was it possible, Zariq thought, that the very contradictions that his people had sought to eliminate were the source of humanity's strength? He paused for a moment, his fingers hovering over the terminal. He wanted to understand more, to delve deeper into the philosophies that underpinned human thought. He searched the archives for writings on morality and found a vast array of texts, each one exploring the nature of right and wrong in a way that seemed foreign to him. One philosopher, in particular, stood out, an ancient human known as Friedrich Nietzsche. His writings were bold, unapologetic, challenging the very foundations of morality and existence. "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal," Zariq read aloud, the words lingering in the air. A bridge. It was an image that resonated with him. Humanity, it seemed, was always in flux, always striving toward something greater, even if they didn't fully understand what that was. They were incomplete, always becoming, always changing. This lack of finality, this refusal to be defined by any one thing, it was both their curse and their gift. Zariq found himself reflecting on his own people once more. They had achieved stability, peace, and order. But in their quest for harmony, had they lost something essential? The humans, for all their flaws, embraced their imperfections. They saw beauty in the struggle, in the very act of becoming. It was a perspective that Zariq found disquieting, yet oddly liberating. Perhaps the very thing that made humanity so dangerous was also what made them extraordinary. As he sifted through more texts, Zariq came across accounts of sacrifice, of humans who had given everything for the sake of love, for family, for beliefs that transcended their own survival. He read the story of a human soldier who, in the heat of battle, had thrown himself on a grenade to save his comrades. The act was brutal, senseless in its immediacy, yet profoundly moving in its intent. Zariq couldn't understand it, how a creature could willingly destroy itself for others. In his own culture, sacrifice was calculated, logical, always for the greater good. But here, it seemed to be driven by something far more primal, something that defied reason. And yet, it was these very moments of irrationality that gave humanity its depth. Their capacity for love, for sacrifice, it was as boundless as their capacity for violence. The two were intertwined, inseparable. To understand one, Zariq realized, was to understand the other. Zariq's gaze drifted to a sculpture in the corner of the holographic display. It was a simple figure of a man, hands raised in both surrender and defiance, his face a mixture of anguish and serenity. The figure seemed to embody everything Zariq had learned about humanity, their constant dance between life and death, between destruction and creation, between love and hate. It was as if they carried the universe within them, a universe not of harmony, but of tension, of forces pulling in opposite directions, and yet somehow existing together. The weight of this realization pressed down on Zariq. Humanity was not defined by their violence, nor by their love. They were defined by the space between, by the way they held these contradictions within themselves and somehow made sense of it. It was a kind of strength that Zariq had never encountered before, a strength that came not from perfection, but from embracing imperfection. And then, as he stared at the sculpture, something shifted in Zariq's mind. A thought, almost too profound to grasp fully, began to take shape. The Deathworld status of Earth, the label that had seemed so clear, so definitive, was perhaps not just a reflection of the planet's external dangers, but of the internal wars humans fought within themselves. Earth was a place of extremes, yes, but so too were its inhabitants. The violence of the world had shaped them, but it was their response to that violence, their refusal to be defined by it, that had made them into what they were. Zariq blinked, his chest tightening with the weight of the epiphany. Humans were not just survivors of a death world. They were creators in the midst of chaos, beings who had learned to live with the tension of opposites. Their strength lay not in their ability to conquer, but in their ability to endure, to hold both destruction and creation in their hands and choose to move forward. The archives around him felt suddenly too small, too limited to contain the enormity of what he had just realized. Zariq leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. This was no longer just an academic exercise. It was something far deeper, something that spoke to the very core of existence. Perhaps, Zariq thought, the greatest danger of a death world was not the external forces that threatened life, but the internal wars that shaped the beings who lived there. And perhaps, in understanding humanity's paradox, he might begin to understand his own. The archives had become an almost sacred place for Zariq. Here, in the stillness of its halls, away from the distractions of his peers, he felt closest to understanding the complex species he had been studying. Today, however, the weight of what he was about to explore felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if the information he was about to uncover carried with it an unsettling truth. The terminal glowed softly before him, casting long shadows across the room. His classmates were scattered at various stations, but their voices were distant, a faint murmur drowned out by Zariq's focus on the task ahead. Today's lesson was one that stirred a deep sense of both awe and unease in him, humanity's relationship with nature. He pulled up the first data set, detailing Earth's natural world. Images of predators flashed across the screen, creatures that, even in their stillness, exuded power. There was something primal about Earth's life forms, a rawness that Zariq had not encountered on other planets. Earth was a planet of predators, and it was clear that survival on this world required a kind of ruthless efficiency. Yet, as fierce as these creatures were, they paled in comparison to the species that had come to dominate the planet. The screen shifted to images of humanity's early interactions with nature. Primitive tools, simple shelters, signs of a species that had once been at the mercy of its environment. But even in these early stages, Zariq could see the seeds of something greater. The humans had been fragile, weak compared to the predators around them. Yet they had something no other creature possessed. It wasn't just intelligence, it was an innate drive to reshape the world around them. Where other species adapted to their environment, humanity had begun to force the environment to adapt to them. He leaned back in his chair, watching as the timeline of human development sped forward. Agriculture, the domestication of animals, the rise of cities, each innovation a step further from nature, each one a declaration of humanity's intent to conquer the world that had once threatened them, and conquer it they had. Zariq marveled at the rapid progress, at how a species once vulnerable had risen to become the dominant force on their planet. But beneath the admiration, there was a growing sense of disquiet. The images shifted again, this time to humanity's industrial age. The plumes of smoke, the vast machines, the factories that stretched endlessly across the land. It was clear that humanity's relationship with nature had changed. Where once they had worked in harmony with the land, they were now bending it to their will. Forests were razed, rivers diverted, entire ecosystems altered to suit their needs. Zariq watched as the natural world was systematically transformed, reshaped to fit the ever-expanding demands of human civilization. It was then that the first flicker of doubt entered his mind. He had admired humanity's resilience, their ability to survive and thrive in a hostile world. But this was something different. This was not survival, it was domination. And with that domination came destruction. The more he watched, the more he realized that humanity's progress was built on the bones of the very world they had risen from. Zariq's peers were similarly captivated, but as the lesson continued, the air of curiosity in the room began to shift. There was a tension building, a subtle but growing sense of unease. He could feel it in the way his classmates exchanged glances, in the way their conversations became more subdued. For all their advancements, there was something deeply troubling about humanity's relationship with nature. They had conquered it, yes, but at what cost? The lesson delved deeper into humanity's technological achievements. Space exploration, artificial intelligence, the creation of machines that could outthink and outwork their creators. On the surface, it was a testament to the species' ingenuity, to their unrelenting pursuit of progress. But Zariq couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The more humanity advanced, the further they seemed to drift from the world that had given them life. It was as if they were running from something, trying to escape the very thing that had shaped them. He pulled up a series of reports detailing the environmental impact of human activity. The data was stark, undeniable. Rising temperatures, mass extinction, the depletion of natural resources, humanity had taken from the Earth without thought of giving back. And now, the planet was beginning to push back. Zariq could see the pattern emerging clearly. Humanity's progress was not sustainable. Their technological advancements had come at a great cost, not only to the natural world but to themselves. As he scrolled through the reports, a particular phrase caught his eye: Anthropocene extinction. It referred to the current geological age, one defined by humanity's impact on the planet. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species had become the driving force behind mass extinction. Zariq stared at the words, feeling a cold dread settle over him. This was not just a lesson in history or science. This was a warning. His thoughts drifted to the many planets he had studied, to the civilizations that had risen and fallen over millennia. None had ever been so deeply entwined with their environment as humanity, and yet none had ever been so willing to destroy it. Zariq couldn't help but wonder, was this the fate of all advanced species? Was the pursuit of progress inevitably tied to self-destruction? The thought lingered, unsettling and unresolved. The room had grown eerily quiet as the students continued their studies. Zariq could see the same questions forming in the eyes of his classmates. They had come to admire humanity's resilience, their capacity for innovation. But now, they were beginning to see the darker side of that progress. It was a paradox that Zariq found difficult to reconcile. How could a species so brilliant, so capable of creating wonders, also be capable of such widespread destruction? He turned his attention back to the terminal, pulling up records of Earth's environmental history. The planet had survived countless mass extinctions, volcanic eruptions, and ice ages, each one a testament to its resilience. And yet now, it was humanity that posed the greatest threat to its survival. Zariq couldn't help but feel a deep sense of irony. The species that had once fought so hard to survive was now the one threatening the very world that had nurtured them. As the lesson drew to a close, Zariq found himself alone in the archives, long after his classmates had left. He couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial had been revealed today, something that went beyond the data and the reports. Humanity's relationship with nature was more than just a matter of survival or progress. It was a reflection of their deepest desires, their need to conquer not only the world around them, but the world within themselves. And yet, Zariq couldn't help but wonder, was this conquest inevitable? Was humanity doomed to destroy the very thing that had given them life? Or was there still hope, some way for them to reconcile their need for progress with the fragile balance of the natural world? He stood from his desk, the terminal powering down behind him. The questions lingered in his mind, unanswered. but they had sparked something within him. For the first time, he began to see humanity not as a species defined by their strength, but by their fragility. They were walking a thin line, and the future of their world, and perhaps their very existence, hung in the balance. As Zariq left the archives, the weight of what he had learned pressed down on him. He couldn't help but feel that humanity's story was far from over. But whether it was a story of triumph or tragedy remained to be seen. The archives hummed with a low, steady pulse as Zariq entered the room. The tranquility of the space was a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned within him. Today, the focus was on humanity's evolution of weaponry, a subject that promised to unveil the darker aspects of their progress. Zariq had expected to find revelations about human ingenuity, but he was unprepared for the depths of darkness and complexity that awaited him. The terminal flickered to life, displaying an array of images and data points. The initial documents revealed the primitive weapons of early humanity: crude stone tools, sharpened sticks, and slings. These artifacts were simple, yet they spoke volumes about the early human struggle for survival. They were tools born out of necessity, designed to protect against predators and rival tribes. Zariq noted the simplicity of these early weapons, their effectiveness rooted in their straightforward design. As the timeline advanced, the nature of the weaponry evolved. The images became more sophisticated: the development of bronze and iron weapons, the advent of the bow and arrow, and the rise of gunpowder. Zariq observed the increasing complexity and scale of these inventions. Each leap in technology seemed to correspond with an escalation in the scale of violence. The simple tools of survival had given way to instruments of war. He watched in silence as the data displayed the progression from swords and muskets to rifles and artillery. The advancement was astonishing, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of unease. Humanity's ability to create increasingly destructive weapons was both a testament to their ingenuity and a stark reminder of their capacity for self-destruction. The screen shifted to images of the 20th century: tanks, fighter jets, and, finally, the most devastating weapon of all, the atomic bomb. The stark visuals of mushroom clouds and the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were displayed in cold, unflinching detail. Zariq felt a chill as he viewed the raw power of these weapons. The bombs had not only altered the course of human history, but had also introduced a new level of existential threat. Zariq's peers gathered around, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. The room was filled with murmurs of disbelief as the full scope of humanity's weaponry unfolded before them. The power to annihilate entire cities, to cause mass destruction on an unprecedented scale, these were concepts that transcended mere technological advancement. They represented a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with itself and the world. A debate quickly ensued among the students. Some were horrified by the sheer scale of destruction that humanity had engineered. They saw it as a reflection of humanity's inherent violence, an inevitable outcome of their struggle for survival. Others argued that these weapons were not merely tools of destruction, but a sign of humanity's drive to protect themselves from external threats. They saw the weapons as a response to the constant dangers of the Deathworld, a means of ensuring their continued survival. Zariq listened intently, his mind racing as he tried to reconcile these conflicting perspectives. The debate was not just about the nature of human weaponry, but about the very essence of humanity's struggle. Was their drive for power and defense an inherent aspect of their nature, or a product of their environment? And if it was the latter, did it mean that the Deathworld's harsh conditions were shaping humanity's approach to survival in ways that were both profound and troubling? As the discussion deepened, Zariq's internal conflict grew more acute. He found himself grappling with a fundamental question: was humanity's obsession with weaponry a reflection of their nature, or a response to the threats they faced? The philosophical implications were staggering. If their environment had driven them to develop such powerful weapons, what did it say about the nature of their existence? Were they trapped in a cycle of violence, destined to destroy themselves as a result of their own innovations? The conversation shifted to the implications of humanity's weaponry on their future. Zariq couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. The knowledge of humanity's capacity for destruction was unsettling, but it was also a revelation. If humanity's most dangerous weapon was not just the technology they had developed, but their own capacity for self-destruction, then the future was fraught with uncertainty. The students continued to study the records, their discussions growing more intense. Zariq's gaze wandered back to the terminal, where a new set of data had appeared. It was a report on the potential for human extinction, not just from environmental factors, but from their own creations. The data outlined various scenarios in which humanity could bring about its own end, from nuclear warfare to biological threats. The chilling realization dawned on him. Humanity's greatest threat was not just the world they inhabited, but their own ability to wield power in destructive ways. He scanned the report, his heart pounding as he absorbed the full scope of the information. The potential for extinction was not a distant possibility, it was a real and present danger. Humanity's advancements had given them the means to reshape their world, but they had also given them the means to end it. The sense of foreboding that had been building throughout the lesson now crystallized into a profound and unsettling truth. As the class drew to a close, Zariq remained behind, absorbed in his thoughts. The weight of what he had learned was heavy, and he struggled to process the implications. Humanity's drive for survival, their capacity for creation and destruction. It was all intricately intertwined. The more he delved into their history, the more he realized that their fate was precariously balanced on a knife's edge. The door to the archives opened, and Zariq's peers began to leave. He stayed behind, his mind consumed by the revelations he had encountered. The debate and discussions had been enlightening, but they had also raised more questions than answers. If humanity's weaponry was a reflection of their struggle for survival, then what did it say about the nature of their existence? Were they doomed to perpetuate a cycle of destruction, or was there hope for a different path? As the last of the students departed, Zariq took a deep breath and looked around the room. The quiet of the archives seemed to amplify the weight of his thoughts. Humanity's journey was far from simple, and the more he learned, the more he realized how intricate and delicate their existence was. Their greatest achievements and their most profound failures were inextricably linked, a testament to their complex nature. He left the archives with a heavy heart, the questions lingering in his mind. The future of humanity was uncertain, but one thing was clear: their story was a reflection of their struggle, their resilience, and their capacity for both creation and destruction. As Zariq walked away, he knew that the next phase of their study would be crucial. The secrets of humanity were far from fully revealed, and the answers he sought were buried deep within their history. As the door to the archives closed behind him, Zariq felt a sense of foreboding. The journey ahead promised to be one of revelation and discovery, but also one of deep philosophical inquiry. Humanity's fate, and the secrets of their world, were waiting to be uncovered. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the cold light of screens that flickered with ancient data. The students had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine exploration of humanity's history with alien encounters. Yet, the atmosphere in the room was tense, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. Zariq could feel the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on him, a tangible tension that seemed to pulse through the air. The terminal flickered on, projecting a series of historical records and images that documented humanity's first encounters with extraterrestrial life. These records were not just dry accounts of events, they were vivid snapshots of humanity's complex reactions to the unknown. The images showed a spectrum of responses, from fear and hostility to awe and reverence. Zariq's gaze was drawn to the earliest records, where human reactions were marked by confusion and dread. The first image showed a grainy photograph of an unidentified spacecraft hovering above a small town. The black and white image was accompanied by transcripts of frantic communications between local officials and military personnel. The words, though centuries old, echoed with a sense of panic that was almost palpable. The human response was raw and visceral, a mix of curiosity and terror. As the timeline progressed, the records grew more detailed. Zariq observed scenes of alien crafts landing in open fields, human soldiers surrounding them with weapons drawn. The encounters were fraught with tension, characterized by standoffs and miscommunications. The images depicted humanity's instinctive response to the unknown, a defensive posture driven by a fundamental fear of what lay beyond their understanding. Yet, there were moments of wonder as well. Zariq watched as human scientists approached the alien ships with awe, their eyes filled with a mix of trepidation and excitement. The records showed attempts at communication, gestures of peace, and scientific curiosity. These moments stood in stark contrast to the hostility that marked other encounters. Humanity's capacity to be both aggressive and inquisitive was on full display. The screen shifted to more recent encounters, where the tension between fear and fascination had become even more pronounced. There were images of elaborate diplomatic meetings, where human leaders and alien representatives sat across from one another, their faces a mix of guarded optimism and wary skepticism. The interactions were complex, marked by a cautious hope for mutual understanding. Zariq's peers were absorbed in the data, their discussions reflecting a mix of shock and intrigue. They debated the nature of humanity's responses. Were they driven by a fundamental fear of the unknown, or by an inherent desire to protect their own world? The questions were not just academic, they cut to the heart of what it meant to be sentient, to confront the vastness of the universe with a mix of wonder and apprehension. Zariq, however, was consumed by a more personal reflection. As he watched the historical records unfold, he grappled with the nature of his own people's responses to the unknown. The parallels between human reactions and those of his own species were striking. His people, too, had encountered unknowns, alien worlds, strange phenomena, and the ever-present threat of danger. The instinct to defend, to protect one's own, seemed universal. Was this a shared trait among all sentient beings? Did the fear and aggression displayed by humans in the face of the unknown mirror the instincts of all intelligent life forms? Zariq found himself questioning whether his own people, with their advanced technology and intellectual prowess, were truly any different from humanity. Were they, too, bound by the same primal instincts that drove humans to both fear and explore? The philosophical implications were profound. If all sentient beings were destined to clash with the unknown, what did it mean for the nature of existence? Was the struggle to understand and confront the unfamiliar a fundamental aspect of sentience, or merely a response to the inherent dangers of the universe? Zariq's mind was awash with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. As the class drew to a close, Zariq's internal struggle reached a fever pitch. The records had revealed not just the history of human encounters with aliens, but also the deeper truths about sentience and survival. The parallels between humanity's responses and those of his own people had become too glaring to ignore. The questions he had been wrestling with, about fear, survival, and the nature of existence, had taken on a new urgency. The other students filed out, their conversations a murmur of excitement and contemplation. Zariq lingered behind, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He knew that the answers he sought were not to be found in the archives. The records had provided glimpses, but they had also left many questions unanswered. With a sense of resolve, Zariq made a decision. He would break protocol and embark on an unauthorized mission to Earth. The desire to seek answers, to confront the unknown firsthand, was overpowering. The philosophical questions that had emerged from the study of humanity's encounters with aliens demanded a deeper exploration. Zariq needed to experience the reality of Earth, to see for himself whether the insights he had gained from the records were true. He knew that his decision would come with risks. The mission would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee of success. But the drive to understand, to confront the questions that had been gnawing at him, was too strong to ignore. Zariq felt a deep sense of purpose as he prepared for the journey ahead. The answers he sought lay beyond the confines of the archives, in the heart of Earth itself. As he made his way to the secure facility where the mission preparations were underway, Zariq felt a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The path ahead was uncertain, but the journey promised to be one of profound discovery. The secrets of Earth, and the nature of sentience itself, awaited him. The shuttle's descent was punctuated by a jarring shake as it broke through the upper atmosphere. The alien students, strapped into their seats, felt the craft shudder with each burst of turbulence. Through the small windows, the chaotic swirl of colors, clouds torn asunder by the sun's harsh rays, grew increasingly vivid. The scene outside was a tapestry of contrasts, clouds of ash mixed with shimmering, distant oceans and shattered landscapes below. As the shuttle touched down, the doors hissed open, and the students stepped out into a world that seemed to pulsate with raw energy. They emerged into a land marked by the remains of a recent conflict, desolate fields littered with debris, skeletal structures standing like silent witnesses to human struggle. The air was thick, laden with the acrid tang of burnt metal and the faint, underlying scent of decay. Zariq took a deep breath, the planet's atmosphere entering his senses with a force he hadn't anticipated. His respiratory filters struggled to adjust, but the very essence of Earth felt overpowering. The air was not just a medium of life, it was a testament to the relentless forces that had shaped this world. The once pristine environment had been scarred by relentless battles, leaving behind a landscape of twisted metal and fractured earth. Every step was a new sensation. Zariq's feet sank slightly into the ash and soot that covered the ground, each footfall releasing a plume of dust that mingled with the stale air. The sky, a heavy gray shroud, pressed down on them, its oppressive weight contributing to the somber mood that enveloped the students. They moved with cautious steps, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. The silence was deafening. The only sounds were the crunch of debris underfoot and the occasional distant rumble of what might have once been machinery or weaponry. This desolate tranquility was punctuated by sudden bursts of shrill noise, perhaps the calls of scavenging creatures or the distant echoes of what once was a vibrant, bustling world. Zariq could almost hear the ghostly whispers of humanity's past, mingling with the wind as it passed over the ruins. As they ventured further into the wasteland, the students encountered remnants of human civilization. Abandoned buildings now reduced to skeletal frames, overgrown with creeping vines and weeds that seemed to reclaim the land with stubborn persistence. Nature was making its bid to reassert itself, but the scars of human conflict were still raw, bleeding through in every broken structure and every empty street. The land was both haunting and beautiful. Nature's resilience was evident in the vibrant colors of new growth that had begun to cover the destruction. Bright green shoots pushed through the cracks in shattered concrete, and wildflowers burst forth in defiant splashes of color amid the gray. The juxtaposition of life and ruin was striking, a stark reminder of Earth's ceaseless vitality in the face of devastation. Zariq's companions were equally struck by the scene. They moved in silence, their expressions reflecting a mixture of awe and dismay. Each of them grappled with the weight of their surroundings, the harsh reality of Earth's Deathworld status making a profound impact on their perceptions. This was no longer a theoretical construct or an academic exercise, it was a visceral experience. The true shock came as they ventured deeper into the ruins. Zariq stumbled upon a scene that would etch itself into his memory. Amidst the rubble, hidden in a small, makeshift shelter constructed from salvaged materials, was a young human child. The child's appearance was stark against the bleak backdrop, dirty, with ragged clothes and a face marked by both dirt and resilience. The child's eyes met Zariq's with a wary curiosity, but there was no fear. Instead, there was a fierce, unyielding spirit in those young eyes, an acknowledgement of the harsh world around them, and a refusal to be cowed by it. Zariq watched as the child expertly foraged through the remnants of a shattered world, finding nourishment in what others might have deemed worthless. The encounter was jarring. Zariq had seen the records, the historical accounts of humanity's struggle, but witnessing it firsthand was different. This child, so small against the vastness of the wasteland, symbolized something profound. It wasn't just about survival, it was about an inherent defiance, a refusal to succumb to the world's cruelty. The child's existence was a testament to a deeper strength, one that transcended the immediate reality of destruction. The raw, unfiltered reality of Earth struck Zariq deeply. The child's survival in the midst of such devastation forced him to confront the paradox of humanity's existence. Earth was indeed a death world, a place where life and death were in constant, brutal struggle. But within that struggle, there was a remarkable capacity for endurance and resilience. As Zariq watched the child, he was overwhelmed by a realization that challenged his previous understanding. The true strength of humanity was not solely in their ability to dominate or destroy. It lay in their relentless drive to continue, to forge ahead despite the overwhelming odds. This strength was not born out of ease, but was a product of enduring adversity and emerging with a spirit that refused to be extinguished. The day wore on, and the students gathered their observations, each one carrying a piece of the profound realization that had begun to dawn upon them. Zariq's internal turmoil was palpable. The encounter with the child had shifted his perspective, bringing to light the dual nature of humanity's existence, the capacity for destruction intertwined with an indomitable will to survive. As they prepared to return to their craft, Zariq lingered a moment longer, absorbing the depth of his experience. The harsh beauty of Earth, the stark contrast between its desolation and the vibrant life it still nurtured, had left an indelible mark on him. The philosophical questions that had once seemed abstract now felt immediate and pressing. What did it mean to survive in such a world? How did humanity's struggle and resilience reflect the broader nature of existence itself? The shuttle lifted off, leaving behind the desolate landscape. As Zariq gazed out of the window, watching the battered planet recede into the distance, he carried with him a newfound understanding. Earth's reality was not just a study in contrasts, but a profound reflection on the essence of life and survival. The journey had only just begun, and the revelations of this day would fuel the questions and reflections that lay ahead. Zariq's decision to come to Earth had been driven by a desire to understand, and in witnessing the raw reality of the planet, he had taken a crucial step toward unraveling the deeper truths about humanity and existence. The mission had revealed more than he had anticipated, challenging him to reconsider the nature of strength, survival, and the relentless pursuit of life in a world defined by its own harsh realities. The alien shuttle drifted silently among the stars, its occupants lost in thought as they traversed the void between Earth and their distant university. The stars outside were distant pinpricks of light, a constant reminder of the vast expanse that separated their world from the harsh reality they had just left behind. For Zariq, however, the celestial view was merely a backdrop to a turbulent internal landscape. The journey back had been punctuated by an uneasy quiet. The students, each deeply affected by their first-hand encounter with Earth, grappled with a whirlwind of emotions. Zariq found himself in a state of reflective contemplation, his mind replaying every moment of their visit, the stark landscapes, the resilience of the young child, the juxtaposition of destruction and survival. These experiences had shifted his understanding in ways he hadn't anticipated, forcing him to confront questions that transcended academic curiosity. In the quiet confines of the shuttle, Zariq revisited the philosophical discussions that had once seemed abstract and distant. The theoretical debates about humanity's nature, its capacity for destruction, its struggle for survival, and its quest for meaning had taken on a new, visceral depth. The raw experience of Earth had provided him with insights that were impossible to glean from data alone. He recalled a heated discussion in the university's Grand Hall, where students and faculty alike had debated the nature of humanity. The arguments had ranged from viewing humans as a species doomed by their own violence to seeing them as a symbol of life's indomitable spirit. Zariq had once aligned himself with the more detached, analytical perspective, seeing humanity through the lens of their failures and achievements. But now, confronted with the reality of Earth's harsh beauty and the child's resolute survival, he found his views shifting dramatically. Zariq's reflections were interrupted by the sound of his fellow students discussing their return. Their conversations were a mix of admiration for humanity's technological prowess and unease about the destructive tendencies they had witnessed. The tension in the discussions was palpable, as each student grappled with the duality of their experience, admiration for humanity's achievements, and concern about their capacity for self-destruction. One student, Lyra, voiced a sentiment that echoed the collective unease. "We saw their potential for greatness," she said, her voice tinged with frustration, "but also their propensity for self-destruction. How can a species be so capable and yet so self-sabotaging?" Another student, Goran, responded with a more analytical tone. It's not just their capability for destruction. It's their ability to endure and rebuild. They are in constant conflict with their environment and with each other. But they also display a remarkable capacity for innovation and growth. Zariq listened to these conversations with a deep sense of introspection. The debates and discussions that had once seemed so clear-cut now appeared more nuanced. The experience on Earth had shown him a different facet of humanity, a facet that went beyond mere survival and conflict. Back at the university, Zariq had been part of an intellectual environment that viewed Earth through a lens of detached analysis. The data, the theories, and the philosophical arguments had painted a picture of humanity as a species marked by its struggles and contradictions. Yet, the reality he had encountered on Earth defied easy categorization. It was a world where the beauty of life and the brutality of existence coexisted in a constant, dynamic interplay. In his solitude, Zariq contemplated the implications of his experiences. The philosophical debates he had once engaged in now felt incomplete, overshadowed by the raw, unfiltered reality he had witnessed. The nature of humanity was not just a matter of theoretical discussion, but a living, breathing paradox that demanded a deeper understanding. As the shuttle approached their home planet, Zariq made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He could not simply return to his previous role as an observer. The insights he had gained on Earth had opened a door to a deeper understanding of life and existence. He realized that to truly grasp the essence of humanity, he needed to immerse himself further in their world. Zariq's decision was met with surprise and concern from his peers. "You're going to stay on Earth?" Lyra asked, her disbelief evident. "Why would you do that?" Zariq's response was thoughtful. "What we've observed is only a fragment of what humanity is. To truly understand them, to grasp their nature and their struggles, I need to experience their world more intimately. I believe that by doing so, I can uncover truths that extend beyond their world and into the nature of existence itself." The gravity of Zariq's decision settled over the group. They knew he was driven by a profound desire to comprehend something that went beyond academic inquiry. His choice to remain on Earth was not just an extension of his studies, but a quest for deeper, philosophical truths about life, survival, and the human spirit. As the shuttle touched down on their home planet, Zariq prepared to say his goodbyes. The alien landscape was a stark contrast to the world he had just left, a place of order and predictability, in stark contrast to the chaotic beauty of Earth. Zariq took one last look at his companions, each of them marked by their own experiences and reflections. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the shuttle, the familiar surroundings of his home world enveloping him. Yet, his mind remained focused on Earth, the world that had left an indelible mark on his understanding of life. The journey had led him to a place of profound realization, where the lines between knowledge and experience, theory and reality, had blurred. Zariq's decision to stay on Earth was not just about further study. It was about embracing a journey of self-discovery and philosophical exploration. The harsh beauty of Earth, the resilience of its people, and the paradox of their existence had unveiled new dimensions of understanding. As he embarked on this new chapter of his life, Zariq carried with him the weight of his experiences and the promise of unraveling deeper truths about the nature of life itself. In his heart, Zariq knew that his quest was far from over. The mysteries of Earth and of humanity were not just academic pursuits, but a journey into the very essence of existence. As he walked away from the shuttle and into the unknown, he embraced the challenge of seeking answers to questions that transcended the boundaries of his own world and ventured into the heart of the human experience. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Zariq emerged from his makeshift shelter, a modest structure assembled from salvaged materials and natural resources. The chill of the morning air bit at his exposed skin, a stark reminder of the harsh reality of Earth. Around him, the small human community he had come to observe was already in motion. The daily struggle for survival unfolded with an almost ritualistic precision, each action a testament to their resilience. Zariq had spent weeks assimilating into this community, a small group of survivors who had found refuge in the remnants of a once bustling city. Their lives were marked by a constant battle against the elements and the remnants of past conflicts. The streets, now overgrown with weeds and scarred by the ravages of war, provided a backdrop to their daily existence. Buildings, half collapsed and covered in grime, stood as silent witnesses to the resilience of those who inhabited their shadows. The people of the community were a mosaic of determination and weariness. Their faces bore the marks of countless struggles, etched with lines of hardship and perseverance. Yet, amid the struggle, there was a remarkable sense of camaraderie and solidarity. Zariq observed as they worked together to repair broken structures, share meager resources, and protect one another from the dangers that lurked beyond their makeshift refuge. One morning, Zariq watched as a group of individuals gathered around a large pot simmering over an open fire. The aroma of a simple stew, a concoction of whatever ingredients they could scavenge, wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of charred wood and damp earth. The act of sharing a meal was not just about sustenance, but about connection. The laughter and conversation that accompanied the meal spoke of a deep-seated bond forged in adversity. Zariq had gradually become part of their routines. He helped where he could, assisting with repairs and learning their ways of survival. His presence, though initially met with suspicion, had slowly been accepted. He listened to their stories of loss and hope, their dreams of a better future amid the ruins of their past. Through these interactions, he began to see a different side of humanity, one that transcended the conflict and chaos he had previously studied from afar. As he watched the community navigate their daily existence, Zariq found himself immersed in a complex web of relationships. He observed the tender interactions between parents and children, the quiet exchanges between partners, and the supportive gestures among friends. These connections, formed under the harshest of circumstances, were a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The philosophical reflections Zariq grappled with grew more profound as he engaged with the community. His thoughts often turned to his own species, living in an environment of relative peace and stability. He pondered the nature of fulfillment and whether a life devoid of hardship could truly be considered complete. The struggle and perseverance he witnessed on Earth seemed to imbue life with a depth and intensity that was absent from his own experiences. Zariq's reflections were interrupted by a moment of crisis. A violent storm, fierce and unforgiving, descended upon the community. The sky darkened, and rain fell in torrents, turning the streets into muddy torrents and the makeshift shelters into soggy refuges. Zariq watched as the community rallied together, their efforts focused on protecting their homes and their lives. The storm, though a natural occurrence, became a battleground where their resilience was tested yet again. As he assisted in shoring up shelters and distributing supplies, Zariq felt the weight of his decision to stay on Earth settle heavily upon him. His immersion in the community's struggle and their shared moments of triumph and despair had left him profoundly affected. The stark reality of their existence contrasted sharply with the life he had left behind, and he began to question whether he could truly understand the depth of their experience without fully participating in it. Unknown to him, his people were searching for him, their concern growing as weeks turned into months without any communication from Zariq. The alien university, once a place of intellectual pursuits, was now embroiled in a search for one of its own. The contrast between the search and Zariq's present reality was striking. While his people sought answers in the structured confines of their world, Zariq was navigating the unpredictable and often harsh reality of Earth. The suspense of his situation began to mount. Zariq was acutely aware of the risk he faced. His decision to remain on Earth, while driven by a desire to understand the true nature of humanity, had placed him in a precarious position. The community he had come to care for was unaware of the larger implications of his presence. To them, he was a helper and observer, not a fugitive from his own world. One evening, as Zariq sat quietly by the remnants of a fire, he reflected on the path that had led him to this moment. The stars above, so distant and indifferent, seemed to offer little solace. He understood now that the true cost of survival on Earth extended beyond the physical struggle. It was also about the emotional and philosophical journey, the quest to find meaning amid the chaos and destruction. As the storm finally subsided and the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Zariq knew that his quest was far from over. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with both challenges and revelations. His decision to stay on Earth had set him on a course of deep introspection and philosophical exploration, one that would continue to shape his understanding of humanity and the universe. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Zariq emerged from his makeshift shelter, a modest structure assembled from salvaged materials and natural resources. The chill of the morning air bit at his exposed skin, a stark reminder of the harsh reality of Earth. Around him, the small human community he had come to observe was already in motion. The daily struggle for survival unfolded with an almost ritualistic precision, each action a testament to their resilience. Zariq had spent weeks assimilating into this community, a small group of survivors who had found refuge in the remnants of a once bustling city. Their lives were marked by a constant battle against the elements and the remnants of past conflicts. The streets, now overgrown with weeds and scarred by the ravages of war, provided a backdrop to their daily existence. Buildings, half collapsed and covered in grime, stood as silent witnesses to the resilience of those who inhabited their shadows. The people of the community were a mosaic of determination and weariness. Their faces bore the marks of countless struggles, etched with lines of hardship and perseverance. Yet, amid the struggle, there was a remarkable sense of camaraderie and solidarity. Zariq observed as they worked together to repair broken structures, share meager resources, and protect one another from the dangers that lurked beyond their makeshift refuge. One morning, Zariq watched as a group of individuals gathered around a large pot simmering over an open fire. The aroma of a simple stew, a concoction of whatever ingredients they could scavenge, wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of charred wood and damp earth. The act of sharing a meal was not just about sustenance, but about connection. The laughter and conversation that accompanied the meal spoke of a deep-seated bond forged in adversity. Zariq had gradually become part of their routines. He helped where he could, assisting with repairs and learning their ways of survival. His presence, though initially met with suspicion, had slowly been accepted. He listened to their stories of loss and hope, their dreams of a better future amid the ruins of their past. Through these interactions, he began to see a different side of humanity, one that transcended the conflict and chaos he had previously studied from afar. As he watched the community navigate their daily existence, Zariq found himself immersed in a complex web of relationships. He observed the tender interactions between parents and children, the quiet exchanges between partners, and the supportive gestures among friends. These connections, formed under the harshest of circumstances, were a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The philosophical reflections Zariq grappled with grew more profound as he engaged with the community. His thoughts often turned to his own species, living in an environment of relative peace and stability. He pondered the nature of fulfillment and whether a life devoid of hardship could truly be considered complete. The struggle and perseverance he witnessed on Earth seemed to imbue life with a depth and intensity that was absent from his own experiences. Zariq's reflections were interrupted by a moment of crisis. A violent storm, fierce and unforgiving, descended upon the community. The sky darkened, and rain fell in torrents, turning the streets into muddy torrents and the makeshift shelters into soggy refuges. Zariq watched as the community rallied together, their efforts focused on protecting their homes and their lives. The storm, though a natural occurrence, became a battleground where their resilience was tested yet again. As he assisted in shoring up shelters and distributing supplies, Zariq felt the weight of his decision to stay on Earth settle heavily upon him. His immersion in the community's struggle and their shared moments of triumph and despair had left him profoundly affected. The stark reality of their existence contrasted sharply with the life he had left behind, and he began to question whether he could truly understand the depth of their experience without fully participating in it. Unknown to him, his people were searching for him, their concern growing as weeks turned into months without any communication from Zariq. The alien university, once a place of intellectual pursuits, was now embroiled in a search for one of its own. The contrast between the search and Zariq's present reality was striking. While his people sought answers in the structured confines of their world, Zariq was navigating the unpredictable and often harsh reality of Earth. The suspense of his situation began to mount. Zariq was acutely aware of the risk he faced. His decision to remain on Earth, while driven by a desire to understand the true nature of humanity, had placed him in a precarious position. The community he had come to care for was unaware of the larger implications of his presence. To them, he was a helper and observer, not a fugitive from his own world. One evening, as Zariq sat quietly by the remnants of a fire, he reflected on the path that had led him to this moment. The stars above, so distant and indifferent, seemed to offer little solace. He understood now that the true cost of survival on Earth extended beyond the physical struggle. It was also about the emotional and philosophical journey, the quest to find meaning amid the chaos and destruction. As the days passed, Zariq's thoughts became increasingly focused on the notion of survival itself. He wondered if the cost of understanding humanity and the universe was worth the personal sacrifices he had made. The complexities of his situation, the juxtaposition of his people's search, and the community's daily battle seemed to echo the larger philosophical questions he had been grappling with since his arrival on Earth. In the midst of his contemplations, Zariq found himself drawn into the daily life of the community. He began to recognize the nuances of their interactions, the small gestures of kindness that spoke volumes about their character. A child, with a playful grin and boundless energy, had taken a particular liking to him. The child's innocent curiosity and unwavering optimism provided a stark contrast to the harsh reality of their environment. Zariq was touched by the child's ability to find joy amid the desolation. The bonds formed within the community were deeply rooted in their shared experiences. Zariq observed as individuals found solace in each other's company, drawing strength from their collective efforts. The sense of unity was palpable, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit had the capacity to endure and thrive. Zariq's immersion in the community's daily life offered him a new perspective on survival. He witnessed firsthand the sacrifices individuals made for one another, the ways in which they adapted and overcame obstacles. The struggle for survival was not merely about physical endurance, but also about the emotional connections that sustained them. Zariq began to understand that survival on Earth was not just about overcoming external threats, but also about finding meaning and purpose in the midst of adversity. The philosophical questions that had plagued Zariq's mind took on a new dimension as he grappled with the realities of life on Earth. He pondered the nature of existence, the interplay between struggle and fulfillment, and the role of hardship in shaping one's character. The juxtaposition of his own species' peaceful existence with the harsh realities of Earth provided a profound insight into the nature of life itself. One night, as Zariq lay awake under the vast expanse of the starlit sky, he found himself reflecting on the human capacity for resilience. The stars, distant and indifferent, seemed to offer little solace in the face of the challenges he had witnessed. Yet, the strength of the human spirit, the ability to find hope and purpose amid the darkness, was a testament to something greater than mere survival. Zariq's decision to remain on Earth had been driven by a desire to understand humanity's nature and, by extension, the nature of the universe itself. As he observed the community's daily struggle, he began to see the deeper connections between their experiences and the broader philosophical questions he had been exploring. The cost of survival, both for the community and for himself, was a reminder of the intricate dance between existence, struggle, and understanding. The days turned into weeks, and Zariq's sense of purpose grew stronger. He had come to appreciate the complexities of human life, the ways in which individuals navigated their existence amidst the chaos and destruction. The bonds formed within the community, the sacrifices made, and the moments of triumph and despair all contributed to a profound realization. As the storm finally subsided and the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Zariq knew that his journey was far from over. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with both challenges and revelations. His decision to stay on Earth had set him on a course of deep introspection and philosophical exploration, one that would continue to shape his understanding of humanity and the universe. Zariq's reflections on the nature of survival and existence were intertwined with his experiences in the human community. He had come to understand that the true cost of survival was not merely about enduring hardship, but also about finding meaning and connection amidst the struggle. The complexities of human life, the bonds forged in adversity, and the philosophical questions that arose from his observations had all contributed to a deeper understanding of the universe. In the days that followed, Zariq continued to engage with the community, his presence a testament to his commitment to understanding humanity's nature. The challenges he faced, the relationships he formed, and the insights he gained all contributed to a profound realization. The journey he had embarked upon was not just about exploring the mysteries of Earth, but also about confronting the fundamental questions of existence. As Zariq looked out over the remnants of the war-torn landscape, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cost of survival, both for the human community and for himself, had become a powerful reminder of the intricate dance between existence, struggle, and understanding. The path ahead remained uncertain, but Zariq was determined to continue his exploration, driven by a desire to uncover the deeper truths of humanity and the universe. The dawn of the new day brought with it an almost haunting clarity. Zariq's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The recent weeks of immersion in the harsh reality of Earth had prompted a deeper introspection than he had ever anticipated. The community's struggles, their resilience in the face of unending adversity, and the relationships he had witnessed had all contributed to a profound shift in his understanding of life and death. The remnants of the storm lay strewn across the landscape, the air still thick with the scent of rain and wet earth. Zariq walked through the streets, now slick and reflective, tracing the marks left by the relentless elements. Each step seemed to echo a question he could not quite articulate. What did it mean to live in constant proximity to death? Zariq had observed humanity's endurance through countless trials, but it was the underlying acceptance of mortality that had begun to unsettle him. The people around him, while fighting against the forces of nature and the remnants of conflict, seemed to have a relationship with death that was both intimate and unspoken. Death was not just a distant concept, but a persistent presence, shaping their lives and actions. He found himself in a small makeshift clinic, where a group of humans attended to the wounded from the recent storm. The clinic was a humble structure, its walls adorned with crude yet effective medical supplies. The room was filled with a tense quiet, the only sounds being the murmurs of conversation and the occasional hiss of a medical device. Zariq stood in the corner, observing the scene with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Among the patients was an elderly woman, her face lined with years of hardship and pain. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and the somber expressions of the medical team indicated that her time was drawing near. Zariq watched as the woman's family gathered around her, their faces etched with grief and acceptance. The quiet exchange of comforting words and gentle touches spoke volumes about their understanding of the inevitable. As Zariq absorbed the scene, he found himself grappling with an existential question that had been plaguing him since his arrival on Earth. His own species, insulated from the daily threats of life and death, had never truly confronted the inevitability of mortality in such an immediate and personal manner. The peace they enjoyed was, in a sense, a double-edged sword, providing security, but also creating a detachment from the raw, visceral reality of existence. The contrast between his own people's existence and the human experience on Earth could not have been more stark. Where his species lived in a state of relative safety, their understanding of life and death was abstract and theoretical. Earth, on the other hand, was a stage where death played a constant and inescapable role, shaping every facet of life. The moral dilemma Zariq faced grew more intense with each passing day. He had been given the opportunity to return to his people, to leave behind the harsh realities of Earth and resume his previous life. But as he stood in the clinic, witnessing the unvarnished truth of human existence, he began to question whether he could truly comprehend life without embracing the inevitability of death. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a deep, mournful wail. The elderly woman had passed away, her body now still and lifeless. The family's grief was palpable, but so was their acceptance. They gathered around her, their faces marked by a profound respect for the life that had just ended. The moment was both poignant and unsettling for Zariq. He realized that, for humans, death was not just an end, but a fundamental part of the continuum of existence, a presence that shaped and defined their lives. Zariq stepped outside, the cold air pressing against his face as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The sky was a muted gray, reflecting the somber mood of the day. He wandered aimlessly through the streets, his mind consumed by the philosophical implications of death's constant presence. He found himself in a quiet park, the once vibrant greens now muted and weathered by the elements. The park was a refuge, a place where the community could momentarily escape the harshness of their environment. As he sat on a weathered bench, Zariq's thoughts drifted to the core of his internal struggle. Could he, with his species-insulated existence, truly grasp the depth of humanity's relationship with death? The concept of death, Zariq realized, was not merely a physical end, but a shaping force that influenced every aspect of life on Earth. It was a relentless reminder of the fragility of existence, a presence that imbued each moment with a sense of urgency and significance. In witnessing the human experience, Zariq saw how death acted as both a motivator and a companion, shaping human actions, relationships, and perceptions. The realization that his own people's understanding of life might be fundamentally incomplete was both liberating and disorienting. Zariq had always been guided by the principles of safety and stability, but now he questioned whether such a life was truly fulfilling. The constant presence of death on Earth had forced him to confront the limits of his own experiences and beliefs. As the day wore on, Zariq returned to the community, where he found himself increasingly drawn to the relationships he had formed. The people who had once been mere subjects of his study had become a source of profound insight. Their struggles, their ability to find meaning amid adversity, and their acceptance of death had all contributed to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive. The community had gathered for a memorial service in honor of the elderly woman who had passed away. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. The family shared stories of the deceased life, their words imbued with a mixture of sorrow and celebration. Zariq observed the ritual with a growing sense of respect for the human ability to find meaning in the face of loss. The service highlighted a crucial aspect of the human experience, the capacity to find purpose and connection even in the midst of death. The act of remembering and honoring the deceased was not just about acknowledging the end of a life, but about celebrating the impact that life had made. It was a testament to the human ability to transform the inevitability of death into a source of unity and reflection. As the ceremony concluded, Zariq found himself once again grappling with the choice that lay before him. The allure of returning to his people was strong, offering a return to the safety and stability he had known. But the insights he had gained on Earth, the profound understanding of death and its role in shaping life, had left him profoundly changed. He recognized that to fully grasp the essence of existence, he needed to embrace the complexity of life on Earth. Death was not merely an end, but a presence that defined and enriched the human experience. By staying on Earth, Zariq had the opportunity to delve deeper into this understanding, to confront the realities that had previously been abstract and distant. The tension within him was palpable. He had come to Earth seeking answers, and he had found them in the most unexpected of places. The acceptance of death, the resilience of the human spirit, and the interconnectedness of life and mortality were lessons that transcended his previous understanding. As night fell and the community settled into their routines, Zariq felt a sense of resolve beginning to crystallize within him. He had witnessed the raw, unfiltered reality of Earth, and it had reshaped his perception of life and death. The decision to remain was not one he made lightly, but it was driven by a newfound understanding of what it meant to truly live and to confront the inevitability of mortality. Zariq's journey was far from over. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges and discoveries. But the insights he had gained, the relationships he had formed, and the profound realizations about the nature of existence had provided him with a renewed sense of purpose. The exploration of humanity's nature, the acceptance of death, and the search for meaning were now integral parts of his journey. As he looked out over the darkened landscape, the stars above seemed to offer a glimmer of hope and guidance. The universe, with its vast and mysterious expanse, seemed to echo the profound truths he had uncovered. Zariq knew that his understanding of life and death was far from complete, but he was prepared to continue his exploration with a deeper sense of purpose and a greater appreciation for the complexities of existence. He had often wondered, from his position among the stars, how a planet like Earth could house beings capable of such contradiction, brilliance and barbarism, creation and destruction, compassion and cruelty. But now, having walked among them, he understood that these contradictions weren't flaws, but the essence of what it meant to be human. Zariq had always been taught that his people, insulated from death and suffering, had achieved a higher state of existence, one free from fear or pain. Yet, it was precisely this insulation that now felt incomplete. The protection from death had removed the urgency of living. His species had grown complacent, disconnected from the reality that every breath, every decision, carried weight only because life could end. Death, once an abstract concept for him, was now a shadow that gave life its meaning. In the distance, the community continued its rituals, sharing meals and quiet conversations, their lives carrying on despite the loss they had suffered earlier that day. For them, death was an accepted part of existence. It was not welcomed, but neither was it avoided with the fear Zariq had always known among his people. The way they moved through grief, honoring the dead while continuing their own lives, gave him a deep sense of admiration. Humans lived with death as a constant presence, but rather than allowing it to consume them, they learned to coexist with it. A soft voice broke his thoughts. "You've been standing there for a long time," said Sarah, one of the younger members of the community. She had been one of the first to welcome him when he arrived. Her expression was curious but kind. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Zariq shook his head, snapping back to the present. "No, not a ghost. Just thinking about things, about your people, and what I've learned." Sarah gave a small smile. "That's the thing about Earth. It makes you think, whether you want to or not." They stood in silence for a moment, both gazing at the stars. "I've seen death today," Zariq finally said, his voice low. "Not for the first time, but this time it was different." Sarah's smile faded, replaced with a more serious expression. "You're talking about Mrs. Denby, aren't you?" she asked softly. "She lived a hard life. The world wasn't kind to her, but she was one of the kindest people I knew." Zariq nodded. "I don't understand how you can continue on after something like that. Where I come from, we've learned to avoid death. It's distant, something that happens after many, many years, if at all. But here, you live with it every day. You face it, and yet you keep going. You find meaning." Sarah looked down at the ground, thinking carefully before speaking. "Death's part of life here, always has been. You can't avoid it, but you can't let it stop you from living either. If we spent all our time worrying about when it's going to come, we'd never actually live. It's the risk that makes life worth something, don't you think?" Zariq considered her words, the simple truth embedded within them. His species had spent eons perfecting life, insulating themselves from harm, building civilizations where danger was a thing of the past. But in doing so, they had also insulated themselves from the true experience of living. There was a vibrancy on Earth that he had never encountered before, a sharpness to every moment because it could be the last. He looked at Sarah again. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if you didn't have to face death? If your people could live without the fear of it?" Sarah thought for a long time, her eyes distant. "Maybe, in the past, I've wished things were different. Maybe we wouldn't suffer as much. But I think, if we didn't know death, we'd lose something important. When someone you care about dies, it hurts like hell, but it also reminds you how much they meant to you. Without death, would we appreciate life the same way? Would we love as fiercely?" Her words hit Zariq harder than he expected. They carried with them the weight of experience, of someone who had faced death, not as a concept, but as a reality. And in that moment, he began to see the depth of what humanity had that his people lacked. Death, far from being an enemy, was a force that shaped life in profound and meaningful ways. It wasn't just the end. It was a presence that permeated every moment, giving it significance. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," Zariq said after a long pause. "You're all so strong." Sarah gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "I don't know about strong. We survive. We don't have much choice in the matter." But Zariq knew it was more than that. It was the way they survived. They didn't just endure. They thrived in the face of challenges that would have broken most beings. It was their connection to one another, their ability to find meaning in the smallest moments, that allowed them to continue on despite the ever-present shadow of death. As the night deepened, Zariq found himself walking back to the small house where he had been staying. The conversation with Sarah lingered in his mind. His decision to remain on Earth had been made with the intent of studying humanity, of learning what made them unique. But now, he realized that what he had come to study was not just their biology or their technology. It was their relationship with life and death, with the very nature of existence itself. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. The concept of death as a shaping force had unsettled him, but it had also awakened something deep within. His own people, with their long lives and insulated existence, had forgotten what it meant to live with urgency. They had perfected the art of survival, but in doing so, they had lost something essential. The risk of death, the fragility of life, these were the very things that gave life meaning. The following day, Zariq rose early, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His people were looking for him, he knew that. The longer he stayed on Earth, the more likely it was that they would come for him. But he couldn't leave. Not yet. There was still so much to learn, so much to understand. As he moved through the village, he noticed the subtle rhythms of life continuing on. Children playing in the streets, the elderly sitting in quiet conversation, workers repairing damage from the recent storm. Life here was fragile, but it was also full. Every moment was imbued with purpose, whether it was the simple act of repairing a roof or sharing a meal with loved ones. Zariq found himself at the edge of the village, where the vast expanse of wilderness stretched out before him. The landscape was both beautiful and harsh, a reflection of the planet itself. In the distance, he could see the remnants of old battlefields, the scars of war still visible on the land. Yet, even in this harsh environment, life persisted. Plants grew through cracks in the ground, animals roamed freely, and humans continued to build their lives in the midst of it all. It was here, on this Deathworld, that Zariq had begun to understand the true nature of existence. Life was not about avoiding death, but about embracing it as part of the journey. His people, for all their advancements, had lost sight of this truth. They had sought to control life, to remove all danger, all risk. But in doing so, they had removed the very thing that made life meaningful. Zariq's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see one of the village elders approaching, a man named Thomas. The elder had always been a quiet presence, observing more than he spoke, but Zariq had come to respect him deeply. "You've been spending a lot of time out here," Thomas said, his voice calm and steady. "Something on your mind?" Zariq hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about my people, about the life we've built for ourselves. We've eliminated so many of the dangers you face here on Earth. We've found ways to live without fear of death." Thomas nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "That sounds like a good life." "It is," Zariq agreed, though his voice lacked conviction. "But I'm starting to wonder if we've lost something in the process. Your people, you live with death every day, but it doesn't break you. It seems to make you stronger." Thomas smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Death's a part of life, always has been. We don't like it, but we can't ignore it either. It's what keeps us going, I think. Knowing that our time is limited makes every moment matter." Zariq looked out at the landscape again, his thoughts heavy. "I'm beginning to understand that. Back home, we live so long, and death is so rare that we forget what it means to truly live." Thomas placed a hand on Zariq's shoulder, a gesture of quiet understanding. "Maybe that's why you're here, to remember." Zariq looked at the elder, feeling a sense of clarity settle over him. His decision to stay on Earth had been made in part out of curiosity, but now it felt like something more. He had come to this planet to learn, and in doing so, he had begun to rediscover something fundamental about existence itself. The air was cool, fresh with the scent of pine and the lingering dew on the grass beneath his feet. From this vantage, he could see the small homes below, their stone walls and thatched roofs catching the first light of the day. The simplicity of it all, the calmness, stirred something deep within him. There was an undeniable beauty to Earth, a beauty not found in the sterile, engineered perfection of his home world. For weeks now, Zariq had lived among these humans, sharing in their daily struggles, their joys, their losses, and in that time he had come to see them not as primitive or violent creatures, but as beings intricately tied to the very essence of life. Their brief, fragile existence gave them a depth he had never encountered before. It wasn't just their adaptability or their ingenuity that impressed him. It was their capacity for love, for hope, even in the face of inevitable death. He reflected on Sarah's words from the previous night, still echoing in his mind. Death's part of life. It's what keeps us going, I think. Knowing that our time is limited makes every moment matter. For Zariq, these concepts were not only foreign, they were unsettling. His species had spent millennia perfecting themselves, perfecting their society, eliminating all forms of suffering and danger. They had achieved what his people considered a utopia. And yet, standing here now, on this hill, with the weight of the sun's warmth on his skin, he wondered if perfection was the wrong pursuit. His people didn't know pain the way humans did. They didn't know love the way humans did. Their relationships were stable, logical, and efficient, but there was none of the fiery intensity he had seen between lovers here on Earth. The passion in the way they argued, the desperation in the way they held one another after a long separation, the depth of their grief when death came, these emotions, so raw and unfiltered, were absent in his world. His people had eliminated risk, but in doing so, had also eliminated the profoundness of connection. What was love, after all, without the possibility of loss? A sound from behind startled him out of his reverie. It was Sarah again, making her way up the hillside, carrying a small basket of berries she had likely foraged earlier that morning. She gave him a warm smile when she reached him, her eyes reflecting a curiosity that had not dimmed since his arrival. "Up early again," she said, offering him some berries. "You think too much, you know that?" Zariq took the berries without protest, chewing slowly as he gathered his thoughts. "Humans, you all seem so comfortable with uncertainty. I've been trying to understand how you can live with the knowledge that everything is temporary. How you can love so fiercely when you know that everything you love will eventually end." Sarah sat down beside him, her expression thoughtful. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Sometimes it's terrifying, but it's also what makes life worth living. The way I see it, love isn't about holding on forever. It's about being fully present in the moment, giving everything you have, knowing that it could be gone tomorrow. That's what makes it real." Zariq nodded slowly, but he still struggled to fully grasp the depth of her words. "And death?" he asked. "You don't fear it?" "Of course I do," she said, her voice soft. "But death is part of the bargain we make for being alive. It's the price we pay. Without it, I don't think we'd value anything as much as we do." Zariq fell silent, contemplating the weight of her words. He had never considered life in such a way before. His people had eradicated death as a concept. They lived long, stable lives, free from disease, free from danger. They valued efficiency, stability, predictability, but in doing so, had they inadvertently stripped life of its meaning. As if sensing his inner turmoil, Sarah reached out and touched his arm. "You've changed since you got here, you know? When you first arrived, you seemed so distant, so sure of yourself. Now, you're more human than you realize." Zariq glanced at her, surprised by her words. Human. The very idea was absurd. He was an alien, an outsider. And yet, there was a part of him that understood what she meant. The longer he stayed on Earth, the more he felt connected to these people, to their struggles, their triumphs, their fears. He had come here to observe, to learn, but in the process, he had found something much more profound, a deeper understanding of himself. But this understanding came with a price. Later that day, The communication signal from his homeworld came through. It was a voice he recognized, one of the high-ranking officials from the council. Zariq had been avoiding these communications for days now, but he knew he couldn't put it off any longer. "Zariq," the voice said, calm yet firm, "it is time to return. Your mission has been completed, and your continued absence is causing concern. We have tolerated your extended stay, but the council will not wait much longer." Zariq closed his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. To return to his people meant going back to a life of safety, of comfort. It meant leaving behind the dangers and uncertainties of Earth, the things he had come to both fear and cherish. But it also meant abandoning the people he had come to care for, abandoning the journey of self-discovery he had only just begun. I'm not ready to return," Zariq said, his voice betraying the conflict within him. The silence on the other end of the transmission was palpable. When the voice finally spoke again, it was tinged with something Zariq hadn't expected: disappointment. "You have become too attached to the humans. This is not what we sent you for. You are putting yourself and our species at risk by staying any longer." "I need more time," Zariq insisted, feeling the urgency rise in his chest. "There's still so much I don't understand. The humans, they're not like us. They live in ways we can't even begin to comprehend. I've learned things here, things that could change everything." Another long pause, and then the voice spoke again, colder this time. "Your attachment to these beings is clouding your judgment. Return now, or there will be consequences. The council will not be patient forever." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Zariq standing there, staring at the empty screen. The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, but more than that, it was the realization that his people didn't understand what he was experiencing. They couldn't. How could they, when their lives were so fundamentally different? He turned off the communication device and walked outside, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the village. In the distance, he could see the humans going about their evening routines, preparing meals, tending to their animals, talking and laughing with one another. It was a scene of peaceful simplicity, but to Zariq, it was so much more. It was life in its purest form, lived in the shadow of death, but with a vibrancy that his people had long since forgotten. And then it hit him: he couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything he had seen and learned. To return to his people would be to turn his back on the very things that made life meaningful. It would be to reject the lessons he had learned here, to close himself off to the beauty of uncertainty, the strength that came from vulnerability. He thought about Sarah, about the bond they had formed over the past few weeks. She had taught him more than anyone else, not through lectures or explanations, but through her simple, honest way of living. She had shown him what it meant to care for others, to risk everything for love, even when the outcome was uncertain, and in doing so, she had shown him a part of himself he hadn't known existed. Zariq made his decision then and there. He would stay. The next morning, Zariq walked down to the village, his mind made up. The sky was overcast, a fitting backdrop for the weight of the choice he had made. As he approached the group of humans, he noticed Sarah was among them, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Zariq," she called out, waving him over. "We're just about to head out to gather supplies. Care to join us?" He smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. "I'd like that." For the first time since he had arrived on Earth, Zariq felt truly at home. Not because of the safety or the comfort, but because he had finally found something worth fighting for. He had found a way to live, not just survive, but live, with all the messiness, the pain, the uncertainty that came with it. And in that, he had found something far more valuable than the safety of his homeworld. As the group set off into the forest, Zariq looked up at the sky, knowing that his decision would not go unchallenged. His people would come for him eventually, and when they did, there would be consequences. But that was a problem for another day. For now, he was content to walk among the humans, to share in their lives, to embrace the risk and the reward of truly living. A dull, constant hum had settled over the village, a sound only he could hear. It was the signal he had been dreading, the arrival of his people. They were coming for him, just as they had promised, and this time there would be no ignoring their call. He glanced over his shoulder at the village, its simple homes now bathed in the pale light of dawn. The humans were beginning to stir, unaware of the impending arrival of alien beings from the stars. They moved with their usual efficiency, preparing for the day's tasks, their faces worn but resolute. Each person carried with them the weight of their mortality, yet they lived with a quiet strength that Zariq had come to admire, even envy. The sound of footsteps broke through his thoughts. Sarah appeared beside him, her expression curious but calm. She had grown accustomed to his early morning vigils, though today there was something different in her gaze, something that told Zariq she sensed the change in the air. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with concern. Zariq nodded, unable to find the words to explain what he knew was about to unfold. His people would arrive soon, and with them, a conflict that had been building within him for weeks. He had changed since coming to Earth, irrevocably so. And now, the same question that had haunted him was about to be posed to his people. Could they accept the brutal truths of this planet? Could they understand what Zariq had come to see so clearly? "I have to face them," Zariq finally said, turning to meet Sarah's gaze. "They won't leave without me." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her eyes filled with that same unspoken understanding that had grown between them over time. She didn't ask what he planned to do, nor did she offer any reassurances. Instead, she simply nodded, accepting the reality of the situation as only a human could. "I'll go with you," she said, the quiet strength in her voice cutting through the tension that had been building in Zariq's chest. Zariq wanted to refuse, to protect her from what was coming, but he knew that would be futile. Sarah, like the rest of her people, was no stranger to danger. They lived with it every day, in ways that his own species could barely comprehend. And that, more than anything, was why he had come to respect her. She understood the fragility of life, but she never let it stop her from living fully. Together, they made their way to the clearing just beyond the village, where the ship would land. As they walked, Zariq's mind churned with the philosophical revelations that had been building within him since his arrival. His people, so focused on preservation and perfection, had lost something vital in their pursuit of safety. They had forgotten what it meant to truly live, to face death not as an enemy, but as a constant companion. By the time they reached the clearing, the hum in the air had grown louder, and the ship's sleek, silver form appeared on the horizon. It descended with precision, its landing calculated and efficient, just as everything about his people was. The contrast between the cold, metallic surface of the ship and the wild, untamed beauty of the forest around them was stark. Earth was alive, chaotic, and unpredictable. The ship, by comparison, was sterile, devoid of the messiness that defined life here. The hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged, members of Zariq's own species, their features sharp and emotionless. They wore the same sleek uniforms he had once worn, their posture perfect, their movements synchronized. It was as if they had stepped out of a different world entirely, one where death was an abstract concept, not a daily reality. The leader of the group, a tall figure named Kale, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Zariq," he said, his voice carrying the authority of their council, "it is time to return." Zariq felt the weight of the moment settle over him. This was it, the decision he had known was coming. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his people and what they were willing to confront. Could they see what he had seen? Could they accept the harsh beauty of Earth, with all its dangers and uncertainties? "I'm not returning," Zariq said, his voice calm but firm. "Not yet. There are things you need to see, things we've forgotten." Kale's brow furrowed, a rare display of emotion for their kind. "What are you talking about? You've spent too much time among these creatures. You've lost your perspective." Zariq shook his head, feeling the clarity of his decision solidify within him. "No, Kale. I've gained perspective. Our lives, they're so safe, so controlled. But in our pursuit of perfection, we've forgotten what it means to live. These humans, they know something we don't. They understand life in a way we've lost." Kale's eyes narrowed, his posture rigid. "We are not like them, Zariq. We do not need to embrace chaos to find meaning. Our existence is superior because we have eliminated suffering and death. This planet is a death world. It is beneath us." Zariq glanced at Sarah, who stood silently beside him, watching the exchange with an intensity that spoke of her own understanding. She knew what was at stake here, even if Kale and the others did not. She knew that Zariq's people had come to retrieve him, but they had also come to confront something far deeper, a fundamental difference in how they viewed life itself. "This planet," Zariq said, turning back to Kale, "is alive. Yes, it is dangerous. Yes, death is a constant presence here, but that's what makes it real. That's what gives life its meaning. Without the possibility of loss, there is no reason to love, no reason to care. We've eliminated suffering, but in doing so, we've eliminated what makes life worth living." Kale's expression darkened, and he took a step closer to Zariq, his voice low and cold. "You've been corrupted by them. This is not our way. We do not need to experience death to understand life. You've lost sight of our purpose." Zariq stood his ground, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "No, Kale, you've lost sight of it. We've been so focused on preservation that we've forgotten what we're preserving. We're clinging to a life that's empty, devoid of meaning. These humans, they've shown me that. They've shown me what it means to truly live." For a moment, Kale said nothing, his gaze locked on Zariq. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent battle of wills between two fundamentally different perspectives. Zariq could feel the weight of his people's expectations, the pressure to conform, to return to the safety and security of their world. But he also felt the pull of Earth, the connection he had forged with its people, its beauty, its rawness. And then, unexpectedly, Kale's gaze shifted to Sarah. He studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "Is this about them?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've become emotionally attached to these creatures. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Zariq's jaw tightened, but he refused to back down. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "It's about them. It's about love, about connection, about living with the knowledge that everything is temporary. It's about embracing the uncertainty of life, instead of running from it." Kale's expression hardened, and for a moment, Zariq thought he might strike him. But instead, Kale stepped back, his face a mask of cold indifference. "You're a fool, Zariq. You've let your emotions cloud your judgment. But if you want to stay here, so be it. You've made your choice. But know this, when the time comes, and this world inevitably destroys you, we will not be there to save you." Zariq felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest, but he held it back. He had made his choice, and he was prepared to face the consequences. Earth had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain, but he knew, deep down, that it had been the right choice. As Kale and the others turned to leave, Zariq watched them go, their figures disappearing into the ship's metallic interior. The hatch closed, and the ship rose silently into the sky, leaving Zariq and Sarah alone once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air, but there was also a sense of finality, of resolution. "You stayed," Sarah finally said, her voice soft but filled with understanding. Zariq nodded, feeling the truth of his decision settle over him like a warm blanket. "I stayed," he echoed, turning to look at her, "because this is where I belong." And for the first time since he had arrived on Earth, Zariq truly believed it. He had found something here, something his people could never offer. He had found life, in all its messy, beautiful, dangerous glory, and he wasn't going to let it go. The air was still, and the distant hum of the human village behind him felt oddly comforting. He had been expecting some kind of emptiness after the departure of his kin, but there was none. Instead, he felt a strange sense of completion, as if a chapter in his life had closed, not with a sudden break, but with the slow and steady resolution that came from finally accepting the inevitable. His mind wandered back over his time on Earth, tracing every step of the journey that had brought him to this point. From the moment he had first arrived, wide-eyed and distant, disconnected from the planet, and its people, to now, standing on Earth's surface, not as a visitor, but as a part of its living, breathing world. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The Zariq who had once looked at humans with a mixture of pity and confusion was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who had come to understand the deepest truth of life, that it was not in perfection or preservation, but in the messy, unpredictable chaos of existence that true meaning was found. Sarah stood beside him, quiet as ever. She didn't ask questions, didn't press for answers. In the weeks since they had met, she had come to understand that some things did not need to be spoken aloud. They could be felt, shared in the silence between two people who had faced the same uncertainties and come out the other side. "There's something about this place," Zariq finally said, his voice breaking the stillness. "It strips away all the illusions we hold about life. There's no escape from it here, no way to shield yourself from the realities of living and dying." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the same horizon. "You've been running from it for a long time, haven't you?" The question hung in the air, not accusatory, just matter of fact. Zariq knew it was true. His people had spent millennia running from the uncertainty that defined human existence. They had built their entire society around avoiding suffering, pain, and death, all in the name of progress. But what kind of progress was it when life became nothing more than a hollow shell, devoid of the very experiences that gave it depth? "I thought we were above it all," Zariq admitted. "I thought we had transcended the need for pain and struggle. But I see now that we were just hiding from it." Sarah remained quiet, letting him continue. "Humans, you live with it every day. The uncertainty, the fragility of life. You face it head-on, without retreating into comfort or safety. And because of that, you understand something we don't. You know how to live, not just survive." The wind stirred the trees, and for a moment Zariq let the sound wash over him. He had spent so long trying to shield himself from Earth's harshness, but now he welcomed it. The unpredictability, the danger, it was all part of what made this place feel real in a way his homeworld never had. "We don't have a choice," Sarah said after a long pause. "Every day is a fight to survive, and sometimes you don't win that fight. But that's what makes the moments we do have worth something. It's what makes love, friendship, family, everything, mean something." Zariq looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. It was true. On his world, where every potential for loss had been carefully engineered out of existence, relationships had become sterile, transactional. There was no urgency, no desperation, no deep need for connection. They didn't love because they had all the time in the universe. But here, on Earth, love was born out of the knowledge that time was fleeting, that loss was inevitable. "We don't have forever," Sarah continued, her voice soft. "We love because we know it won't last. We fight for the things we care about because we know they can be taken from us." The truth of her words settled into Zariq's bones. He had never understood the intensity of human emotions before, had even pitied them for the depth of their feelings. But now he realized that it was their very impermanence that gave those feelings their power. The knowledge that every moment could be their last made each connection, each experience, more valuable. "We've forgotten how to fight for things," Zariq said quietly. "On my world, there's no struggle, no risk. We've become complacent, comfortable in our security. But it's an empty kind of comfort." Sarah's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you were meant to remember what it's like to fight for something that matters." Zariq looked at her, the weight of everything he had learned on this planet pressing down on him. "And what if I've already lost my people? What if they never understand?" Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "They might not. Some of them won't. But you've planted a seed, Zariq. You've given them something to think about. And maybe, one day, they'll start to see things the way you do." Zariq's chest tightened at the thought. He knew that the path he had chosen, to stay on Earth, to embrace its chaos and uncertainty, would likely alienate him from his people forever. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of that. He had found something here, something worth staying for. Not just in the beauty of the planet, but in the way its people lived their lives, with passion, with fear, with love. He turned his gaze back to the horizon, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace of perfection, of safety. It was the peace of knowing that, for the first time, he was living in the moment, fully present, fully aware of the fragility of it all. "I think I've found what I was looking for," Zariq said softly. Sarah smiled, but it was a sad smile, tinged with the understanding that came from living with loss. "And what's that?" Zariq took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth settle over him. "I've found a reason to stay." As the days passed, Zariq's people became a distant memory, their sleek ship disappearing into the stars without a trace. Life on Earth continued as it always had, messy, chaotic, and full of surprises. Zariq found himself slipping into the rhythms of the village, his once foreign presence becoming a familiar part of the landscape. The humans accepted him in their quiet, unassuming way. They didn't ask too many questions, didn't press him for details about his past. It was as if they sensed that he was one of them now, no longer an outsider, but someone who had come to understand the deeper truths of their world. Zariq spent his days helping where he could, learning the intricacies of human life, how they grew their food, how they built their homes, how they cared for one another in ways that were both simple and profound. He was struck by the deep sense of community that permeated the village, the way people relied on one another, not out of necessity, but out of love. There was something beautiful in the way humans connected to each other, even in the face of death and loss. Zariq had seen it in Sarah's eyes, in the way she spoke of her family, her friends. He had seen it in the way the villagers cared for their sick and elderly, in the way they mourned their dead with quiet dignity. It was a stark contrast to his own people, who had long since eliminated the need for such connections. And yet, it was precisely those connections that made life worth living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a soft, golden light, Zariq found himself sitting beside Sarah near the edge of the forest. The air was cool, and the sounds of the night were beginning to stir, crickets chirping, the rustle of leaves in the wind. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, the weight of the day's work still lingering in their muscles. It was a peaceful moment, one of the many Zariq had come to cherish in his time on Earth. "You ever think about what comes next?" Sarah asked, her voice cutting through the stillness. Zariq glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Sarah shrugged, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "I mean, we all die eventually. No escaping that. But what comes after? You ever wonder?" Zariq considered her question, feeling the weight of it settle over him. It was a question he had asked himself many times since arriving on Earth, a question his people had long since abandoned in their pursuit of immortality. "I think," Zariq said slowly, "that what comes after doesn't matter as much as what we do while we're here." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I guess that's true. But it's hard not to wonder, isn't it? What if there's something more?" Zariq smiled faintly, understanding the curiosity that drove her question. Humans, with their limited time on Earth, were always searching for answers, always trying to make sense of the unknown. It was one of the things he admired most about them, their insatiable desire to understand the universe, even when the answers were beyond their grasp. "Maybe there is," Zariq said. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is to live in the here and now, to make the most of the time we have, instead of worrying about what comes next." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she smiled. "You're starting to sound like one of us." Zariq chuckled softly, his gaze returning to the stars. "Maybe I am." As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Zariq felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had found his place, not just on Earth, but in the greater cycle of life and death. He had learned from the humans what it meant to live fully, to embrace the uncertainty of existence with open arms. And in doing so, he had found himself. Far across the galaxy, on a planet untouched by the chaos of Earth, Zariq's people whispered of their time on the Deathworld. The students who had returned spoke of the humans with a newfound respect, their understanding of life forever changed by what they had witnessed. Earth, once a curiosity, was now seen as something more, A place where the fragility of life was not a weakness, but a strength. A place where true meaning could be found in the face of death. And though Zariq's name was spoken in hushed tones, his legacy lived on, a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons were learned not in avoiding death, but in facing it head-on.